In 1917, Jeannie became disgusted with the ruins of Glenwood. She prodded Duncan into buying the property, which was now burdened with delinquent taxes, so that she could evict her former friends. She didn't count on Octavia being clever enough to outwit her, though. She managed to convince the local authorities to declare Dick mentally incompetent and had herself appointed as his guardian. This was all that managed to keep Glenwood's leaky roof over their heads, as an insane person would not be deprived of his home because of tax debts. One can imagine that it didn't take much for the authorities to find Dick mentally ill by that time. By the end of the 1920s, Glenwood remained a shadow of its former self, while Glen Burnie had actually started to show improvement. Jeannie had invested her money shrewdly over the years and had managed to pull most of her money out of the banks before the great stock market crash in 1929. Then an incident occurred, which would be considered minor by most, but which had a bizarre impact on Dick Dana's fragile sanity. One afternoon, Jeannie shot and killed one of Dick's goats. The animal had been making regular forays into Jeannie's yard and eating her rose bushes. Dick pressed charges against her, and the case eventually went to trial. The charges against Jeannie were dropped, much to Dick's dismay, and the entire town learned of the squalid conditions at Glenwood. They began calling the place Goat Castle. Some believe that Dick swore revenge on the woman who had once been one of his closest friends. The incident had been largely forgotten by 1932. Duncan continued to ride out to the house each night, even though his mother had died years before. Each morning he rode back into town, avoiding an automobile in favor of his horse. On August the 4th, as he was approaching the drive leading to Glen Burnie, he had a premonition that something was wrong. When he arrived at the house, a horrific scene awaited him. The front room was in shambles. Broken glass and overturned furniture covered the floors. Blood was spattered on the walls, and a thick trail of gore led out of the house into the driveway. After searching the house and grounds and finding nothing, Duncan summoned the sheriff. A posse spent the night combing the woods around the house, and near dawn, someone discovered Jeannie's body hidden behind some bushes. She was barefoot and wore a blood-stained blue dress. She had been shot several times in the chest and the head by a .32 caliber weapon. The authorities immediately suspected Dick and Octavia for the murder, believing that perhaps the incident with the goat and Dick's mental instability may have combined as the motive. Octavia was questioned, but was eventually released. Dick was held, however, because a deformed and bloody handprint was found in Jeannie's living room. It could not be proven, but it was thought to be a print from the hand that Dick had injured years before. Newspapers all over the country carried the murder story thanks to the prominence and the eccentricity of the principals. The nation was shocked by its first real glimpse into the conditions at Glenwood. Numerous photographs portrayed the poverty of the plantation's inhabitants and revealed a once grand home that had been turned into a veritable barn where farm animals freely roamed. The mansion had fallen into shambles. A column that once supported the veranda across the front of the house had collapsed, and now the ceiling sagged dramatically. Broken windows looked out at the lawn like blackened eyes, and holes dotted the porch where the wood had rotted through. Inside the house was hung with dust and cobwebs. Sections of peeling paper dangled from the walls. Chickens and geese nestled in the velvet and rosewood furniture. The upholstery was alive with fleas and mites, while cockroaches and water bugs skittered across the floor. Animal droppings coated the floorboards, and filth shrouded expensive antiques that had once belonged to Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. Dick and Octavia slept on water-stained mattresses that had been stretched between wooden chairs, and always present were the home's new namesake, the goats. The dirty animals wandered freely, munching carelessly on the books and damask draperies. Horrified and fascinated, tourists and curiosity seekers flocked to Natchez. While Dick and Octavia were still in jail, souvenir hunters picked through the rubbish at Glenwood and carried off relics and antiques. Public sympathy arose for the bizarre pair, and after Octavia was released, an unbiased jury could not be found to hear the case against Dick. Luckily, the case was dropped when the police chief of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, notified the authorities in Natchez about a man who had been shot down in his city. George Pearls had been killed after pulling a .32 caliber revolver on a Pine Bluff policeman. Papers found on Pearls' body indicated that he had recently been in Natchez. As Jeannie Merrill had been killed with a .32, the chief offered an examination of the weapon. The papers would lead detectives to an Emily Burns, who owned a boarding house in Natchez. After being questioned, she admitted that she and Pearls had attempted to rob Glen Burnie. They were confronted there by Jeannie, who attempted to take the gun away from Pearls. In the struggle, Jeannie was shot. A ballistics test confirmed most of the story, or at least the part that had Jeannie being killed by the gun found on Pearls. In addition, Pearls' fingerprints were found at the crime scene. He also had a deformed hand that matched the bloody print found in the living room. At that point, the case was closed, and the charges against Dick were dropped. But was there more to this story than meets the eye? There were many who questioned the veracity of Emily Burns' story and still wondered what role the residents of Glenwood had played in Jeannie's death. Some of those who wondered must have been in positions of authority, for the governor of Mississippi pardoned Emily Burns for her role in the crime in 1940. As for Dick and Octavia, they achieved fame overnight. People continued to come from all over the country to see Goat Castle, and so, like a carnival sideshow, Octavia began distributing leaflets and conducting tours of the house and property, charging 50 cents per person. Octavia crept about the property, carrying a goat in her arms, spinning tales of the plantation's heyday. Dick provided accompaniment for the tours, playing off-kilter classical music on his piano. Each day at dusk, when the last tourist had departed, Dick would return to the piano and play strange melodies that grew louder as the night wore on. The nocturnal music was explosive and powerful, and some would remark that it was loud enough to wake the dead. And perhaps it did, because after nightfall, people in the area began to avoid the thicket of woods between Glen Burnie and Glenwood. It was believed that the area was haunted by Jeannie Merrill's ghost, still seeking vengeance for her murder. Numerous reports of her apparition stated that she had been barefoot, wearing a bloody blue dress, and darting among the trees. Sometimes her moans and wails could be heard above the sounds of Dick's disturbing music. It was said that his piano grew louder as he tried to drown out the sounds of his former friend's mournful cries. Dick and Octavia outlived Duncan, who passed away in 1940. The small amount of money earned by Goat Castle tours sustained the owners of Glenwood for the next 16 years. Finally, in 1948, Dick died from pneumonia and heart disease, leaving Octavia to care for Glenwood alone. She followed her lover to the grave a few months later, dying in 1949. The few belongings that they had left were auctioned off, and in 1950, Glenwood was torn down. After Dick and Octavia died, the sinister tales of the haunted woods intensified. The empty and overgrown plantation fell into even greater decay, and those who trespassed there claimed to often see the ghost of Octavia wandering about the place. She was sometimes described as wearing a calico dress and a straw hat, and at other times, a young beauty in a fine Paris gown. The ghostly sightings were sometimes followed by the strains of piano music, clumsy sounds like notes being played by a crippled hand. As time passed, The stories of the ghosts died, with the legends, and Goat Castle was all but forgotten. The tales of Jeannie's spirit persisted, however. In the 1980s, an owner of Glen Burnie reported hearing a disembodied voice call to her repeatedly. She also told of unseen hands that continuously undid electrical work that was being performed during the restoration of the house. Some believe that perhaps Jeannie's aversion to electricity and modern life manifested itself from beyond the grave. Dick, Octavia, Jeannie, and Duncan are all buried at the Natchez City Cemetery.